Dear students, welcome to the software engineering course. So we have started the first unit, especially the process models. So in the previous session, we have started discussing the prescriptive process models, where we have covered waterfall and V model and other incremental process models as well. So in this session, we are going to look at the evolutionary models, particularly the prototyping model. So we are going to explore the prototyping model in this session. We will begin with the motivation to understand the use cases where prototyping is helpful. Okay, and we will actually deep dive into the concept with the help of a real-time example. And also we will wind it up with advantages and disadvantages of the prototyping model. So by the time we conclude this session, you will have a comprehensive understanding of prototyping model in detail. So this is the agenda of this session. So without any further ado, let's get started. So in in most of the cases or most of the scenarios, a customer may not be aware of the exact requirements. So what exactly he is looking for. There are no detailed requirements, but he has a high-level description of what he is looking for. So he cannot state all the requirements detail a priori upfront, but he knows what he wants in an abstract or some rudimentary way, right? And when it comes to developer, also there might be a situation where developer may not understood the requirements. He is not sure about what customer is looking for. Sometimes he also not sure how the end users, the users of the system, how they interact and make use of the system. So he may not understood it clearly. So in such scenarios, we can make use of this prototyping model, and it actually helps them. And it helps them to come up, to understand the requirements in detail and refine the requirements in detail. So let's see what this prototyping model by using or employing a real-time e-commerce application. So where the customer is looking for selling his products online, like the Amazon and Flipkart system. So he wants to sell his products online, and so in this case, basically he's looking for some payment interface where end users can buy his products or his products, and they have to pay online for the products they have bought. So this is a very high level description, and the customer asks the software team or software developers to come up with the payment interface for his requirement. So then developer starts with working on this working on this prototype. This is called prototype. So first he starts with basic design, and he wants to come up with a prototype. Prototype in the sense it is not exact a final outcome of the system, but it is a toy kind of prototype, and he might have developed this prototype by using a basic HTML or JavaScript or any other basic front-end framework, right? And then he comes up here with these three boxes, okay? And a button called pay, which is useful for making online payment. And the developer, once he has constructed this prototype, he will show this to the customer. He will show this to the customer, or he will deploy in the customer environment, and then customer looks at this form, and customer might ask for what are these three boxes, right? Three boxes represent, and developer says the first box is meant for entering the debit card number, and the second box is for expiry date of the debit card, and the third one is for CVV, and this is the pay button. So by looking at this customer gives the feedback. Since customer doesn't understand what these three boxes are for, so he also assumes the same thing for end user. End user may not understand, because the user who makes use of the system is also not aware of these three boxes. So the feedback that he gives is he asks the developer to keep some labels before the text box to make a context, right? So that end user knows this box is meant for debit card number and this box is meant for entering CVV. And he also look at this pay button. Maybe he may not be happy with this pay button size, and he wants to increase this button and make bigger in size. So these are the feedback. These are the feedback items that has been given to the developer. And then the developer or a team of developers looks at this feedback, right? And then again they will come up with another prototype. In this case, prototype 2. Let us assume in this prototype there are some labels that has been kept here to make context for these text boxes. And this button also has been bigger in size compared to the prototype 1. So again, this prototype has been deployed to the customer environment and to get the feedback from the customer. Then customer gives some feedback again for this prototype, saying that so instead of entering the expiry date manually, he wants to have a calendar icon, right? So that end user can choose the date from the calendar. And also he wants to decrease the input size of the CVV, since CVV code generally doesn't exceed 3 or 4 digits. So he wants to decrease the size of CVV button. So this is the feedback that has been given for this second prototype. Then developer again redesigns this by looking at this feedback and comes up with a calendar icon for the expiry date, right? And the size of the CVV also reduced, and right. So this is again this prototype deployed to the customer environment for further feedback. Generally, customers generally are not happy with simple prototypes. They again come up with a new requirement in this case by looking at this screen. So because initially the developer has assumed there will be only one debit card, right, to be used. Now customer asks for multiple payment options, right? It could be to introduce a net banking facility. So customer will ask the developer, so why don't you introduce net banking feature, or why don't you give a debit card and credit card options as well, both. And so this is a new requirement. The customer is basically trying to refine the requirements for one prototype to other prototype, right? This is the concept of prototype. Now you can assume you can actually start working on the prototype 4. So this you can take it as an exercise, right? You can take it as an exercise for you and come up with the prototype 4 based on the feedback for the prototype 3. And can you guess what could be the feedback for the prototype 4? Just think over it, right? So maybe customer might ask for UPI, right? Because the end users might want to pay with Google Pay, or other UPI based payments like Phone Pay. So this is a new system that is coming in the recent trends. The new UPI based payment system. So in this way, developer comes up with the design and constructs a prototype, and again customer gives the product feedback for the prototypes, and this cycle continues until the customer is happy with the final prototype, right? So what is happening in these phases? The requirements has been getting refined, and they're getting in detailed requirements. So initially they started with a brief requirement saying that customer wants a payment interface. Now we have got a good detailed requirements with exact requirements what customer is looking for. Right? I think you are following this concept, right? Now we'll try to reflect upon the same thing by using some flowchart, right? Prototyping flowchart. This is a graphical flowchart. Look at this. We can understand this by looking at each box. So in the first, what is happening in the first stage? First phase, customer has given the initial requirements. So this first one is initial requirements, which is a high-level description of what he is looking for, what he wants, and this is communicated with the development team or a team of software engineers, basically. Then developers started with a high-level design, and then they have started constructing the prototype. Then the final prototype, I mean the prototype which has been developed and deployed in the customer environment for evaluation. This prototype has been deployed in the customer premises to review and evaluate and comes up with the feedback. I mean, which has been this is I mean. So customer basically reviews this prototype and then he gives the feedback and he updates the requirements once again. So then here the next iteration starts, right? Again, the developers will start working on the design for the next prototype and construct the next version of the prototype. This cycle, again, this will deployed in customer deployed for customer evaluation, and this cycle continues until the customer is satisfied with the final version of the prototype. So once the final prototype is approved, then the developers will start working on the actual product. So in the prototype, basically when the prototype, the kind of programming language, the operating system, in even other software, other case tools, they might be different in the prototype because it's basically for getting the feedback. But in actual development, the tools could be different. It could be Python or React.js or any other framework that they want to implement. So this is a real system actually. This is a real system. Then this will be tested. You have unit testing, integration testing, right? Or other testing activities that has been carried upon here, and the final product will be released and it is used for maintenance. So this is the basic flowchart of the prototype model. Okay. So we also have a different diagram. This diagram is from the Pressman textbook. So you can present both diagrams and then you can explain as per your convenience. So you can look at this. What happens? These are the framework activities that we have discussed in the initial concept of generic process framework. Right? And what is the first framework activity? It is communication. So what happens in this first phase? Basically customer states or discusses with the developer and interact with other team of developers by stating his requirements at a high level. And then the developers, the team will come up with a quick plan. Why do you need a plan? So generally, in the previous example, the e-commerce application example, I gave a very rudimentary example of payment interface. But in real-time scenario and real-time projects, the requirement could be at a complex level. It is not as simple as the payment interface. So that the complex requirement, developers has to come up with a proper plan. So how much budget has to be allocated and how much time is required to develop this prototype, and then they will model with their design. Right? It's a quick next phase is modeling with the quick design. So see, the plan and design, the same framework activities. Only thing we have done is we have prefixed with quick because it is just a prototype and you have to come up with as early as possible so that you can commence the real development. And they start with the modeling. The modeling is basically to visually represent what is the requirement in a graphical interface. The UML, right? Unified Modeling Language. We can make use of that UML here. This is modeling. Then they will enter into the next phase where construction happens, right? Where the construction, in the phase of construction, the actual coding will commence, and unit testing also will be started for the prototype. And this prototype will be deployed in the customer environment. And again, customer gives the feedback and for the delivered prototype. So once the review and requirements are refined in this phase, then again the next iteration will be starting to commence. Okay? And this continues until the customer is happy. Okay. Just try to reflect the same same example that you have presented earlier, the e-commerce example. The customer, the payment interface requirement in the context of e-commerce application. Try to reflect the same thing here. And so if I show this diagrams directly and upfront, you may not appreciate, right? You may not appreciate. So we have started with working with the sample requirement. So here, main thing you have to focus on is it is an evolutionary process model, right? This prototype model comes under category of evolutionary process model. What is evolution in your perception? So the term evolution means you might have heard this Darwin theory of evolution. So where the human being initially started with some single cell amoeba, right? And then he grown up into next animal. Finally he evolved as a human being. So this is the theory of evolution. So similarly, if you in the same lines, if you draw this analogy, what is happening in prototyping model? The customer has stated his requirement at a high level, and with the next prototype and further prototype version, the requirements are evolving. So they are getting evolved with each prototype development. So that is what evolutionary meant in this context, because the requirements are getting evolved over each prototype. I think you're following this concept. And so this is, and we'll next we'll wind up with the advantages and disadvantages phase. Right? We will see what are the advantages and disadvantages of the prototyping model. The first advantage is the user is actively involved. User or the customer actively involved. So they are actively involved with the development team. So because with every prototype they are giving the feedback, and they're reviewing the prototype, and using this approach, errors also detected earlier. Right? Error could be requirement gaps or requirement understanding issues. So they are detected at the prior phases before the actual development starts. Right? And the feedback of each prototype is helping to make the system better. So instead, the first prototype has a very rudimentary screen, and the final prototype has a very evolved screen, right? So the main other advantage is that we don't need to state requirements at a detailed level upfront. We can just give a high-level description, and then we don't need to state what is its input and output from the beginning in detail. But with each prototype, they can get evolved. So these are the main advantages of the prototyping model, right? And also we have disadvantages. What are the disadvantages? The first disadvantage is multiple prototypes. So if the customer asking for more prototypes, they can slow down the entire process. The timeline frames might get increased, and eventually the budget also can increase with the frequent, and also with these frequent changes. The frequent changes can also increase the complexity of the system, right? The requirement might look simple in the beginning, but it is evolving, and it will result in high complexity in terms of budgets and timelines. Also, sometimes some clients are very particular about these prototypes and requirements. If they are unsatisfied, they can throw away these prototypes, and if each prototype and most of the multiple prototypes are thrown away, the developers has to come up with a fresh new prototype every time to satisfy the client. And another disadvantage, which I have not listed here, where sometimes the customer is happy with the final prototype, and he might want to continue the same prototype in the final system, right? And in the final product also. But developer may not agree, because the prototype has been developed with a very basic framework like HTML or CSS or some JavaScript. But the main product should be developed and constructed using a sophisticated framework such as React framework or Python front-end frameworks. But the customer may not agree. So this is again another disadvantage where it results in quality issues, right? Yeah. I hope you understood this prototyping model. We can end the session of this concept here. Let us stop here. Thank you.